Hi there. In this video series, we're going to see the process that are taken in order to design and deploy a solution, network solution. So, how does it start? Well, first it begins with the business requirement. Okay, so normally you would have a requirement from the company where you're working on, from a different team, for a new department, or for a customer outside of your company. And your job will be to first translate that business requirement into a technology, or so that you can see that business requirement and identify the technology that will allow you to deploy those requirements. For this project, I try to use this following example. It's a simple, a very basic one, but this is going to be useful as the startup. And in the following videos, we're going to see more complex features or more complex solutions. So for this one, for instance, you might have a requirement saying, okay, I need to deploy an infrastructure that allows me to have internet access, and I want my end users to be authenticated using a central database, and some of them will be using Windows, some will be using Linux, and I want somehow that policies or security on these end users be controlled dynamically. Okay, so normally you would have something like this from your customer for as a requirement. So as a network engineer or an architect, you have to translate these. Okay, how can I achieve those requirements, and which technologies allow me to meet those requirements? And depending where you're working on, probably you have to figure out also figure out the costs related to that, and that will allow you to identify, okay, which products can I use that provide a specific technology. Okay, for this case, let's just say that, okay, you identify that you're going to use Cisco routers or Cisco products and Microsoft Windows. These are just products that provide the technology that you want to use to meet the requirement. Okay, for router, you could be using a different vendor, for instance, Arista, Juniper. Okay, and for Active Directory, you could use another product as well. So for this one, I'm just using Cisco and Microsoft as the vendors. And once you identify, okay, what are the technology, the products that will meet those requirements, you would have something like this that is called the high-level design. And high-level design just gives you an overview of what you plan to deploy. And based on this overview, on this high-level design, you should be able to explain to your customer, or to validate with your customer, if that's what his idea, what his intended services that he wants to have deployed. And if the customer agrees with you, so then you're going to move to the next step, and that's to have a more detailed design of what your overview is. Okay, so that's what is called the low-level design. Low-level design, okay, you get to specify specifically which devices you're going to use, and in some diagrams you might also have information like the IP address, the services, the port. The idea is that you want to have a more detailed information as possible, so you're looking at the design, you know physically how it's going to be deployed, how it's going to be connected. And for this example, okay, I've chose a router, so I'm already saying the router's host name and the service that will be running, how it's going to be connected to the internet, how the connection will be with different devices. And I'm choosing here 3 switches, and one of the switches will be used to connect my servers, and one of the servers will be running IaaS, and another one will be running Microsoft Windows Server with those services, the port where it's going to be connected, the IP address. And I already chose the IP address and the VLANs for this network. As you can see here, for when normally this IP address will be assigned from your ISP, and depending on your needs, they will provide you a certain range. And for LAN, that's going to be your private IP address. So just making things easier, I'm using 165.74 for WAN, and for LAN I'm using 1065.74. And this is a small network. I could just use the same VLAN, that would be VLAN 1, but just for fun, just using VLAN 10. Okay, so here you can see that you have a more detailed information as compared to high level design. Okay, and different companies, they might have different requirements about the information they want into each one, but the main idea is that you have high level, it's not so detailed, and low level you have more detailed information. And I add as well here what my EVE-NG diagram we're going to look like. And another thing that I want to highlight is when you're making these designs, this is what you intend. Okay, this is what you're planning to do. That doesn't show what you have deployed. And by the time you're making these designs, you're making these planning, you will see that when you start actually deploying, whether it's going to be you or another team, your initial design might be completely different for what will be implemented. Okay, so this is just what you plan to do, doesn't show what you're really going to deploy, because you might face different challenges, probably the switch, then you realize you don't need that switch, or you realize that that network can't be used, things of that nature. Okay, so the planning stage is just what do you want to deploy, doesn't tell what have been deployed. So normally at the projects you have the plan to build, and at the end of the project you have to update your documentation stating what has built, or in some cases you will get to the end of the project and some parts of it weren't deployed at all. Okay, but it allows you to close the project. So here I have a more detailed information about the IP addressing, and here I have the range I'll be using, and depending on different requirements. For this one I just chose, okay, I'm going to have a reserved range for static IP address for servers, printers, and for end users this is going to be dynamic. They're going to use this range from 1 to 199. And I have the IP address that are going to be assigned for my routers, my switches, my Windows server, and IaaS as well. And for ISP router, I'm just going to use the first IP, and I'm going to create a loopback interface just to simulate like I'm trying to access actually the internet. Okay, so my end user, they should be able to reach this IP address from my local network, and I'm saying here I'm going to use VLAN 10. Okay, so again, you start with high level design, you get to more specific one, and once you have this idea of how you're going to deploy, how things are going to be connected, okay, then you start actually deploying. And for each of these sections you will have a different detailed information. For instance, as you can see here at the content for deploying the Active Directory, each of these bullets is going to be a task to be performed. I'm going to share with you this document as well at the end of the videos. So at each bullet point, this is a service that you have to enable, that you have to configure, and you should have already planned these before starting deploying. For instance, what's going to be the Active Directory name, what is going to be DNS address, what is going to be the public one, or going to use the Active Directory to There's the DNS as well, and then pointing to an external DNS. What's going to be the NTP server is going to be the AD, and the AD will rely on an external NTP server. How are you going to add users on AD? Which groups they're going to be assigned to? Which profiles they will have? Okay, so I just start targeting these bullet points. You see that your specifications or your tests, they become more and more detailed. Okay, and the same applies for all the others, like deploying the router, deploying the switches. So this is already a very long introduction video, so let's start with deploying the Active Directory, and I'm going to cover, we can walk through together on how to deploy the Active Directory with all these services. Okay, so see you next one.